Hello, and welcome to Own Your Retirement. My name is Albert Lalonde from Kaizen Financial. If you'd like more information about what you hear during our show today, give us a call at 586-752-7008 or visit us online at www.kaizenfinancialgroup.com. And while at my website, click on the podcast page to check out our past shows and to subscribe to our program on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Amazon Music. Okay. So, since President Trump's tariffs began dominating the financial news sector earlier this year, many who make their living in the financial world have been debating the likelihood that those tariffs would lead to a recession in the United States. But now that the US and China have agreed to slash tariffs for, like, let's say 90 days while negotiations for a longer term agreement continue, there's renewed optimism that we may be able to avoid the recession. So, during today's episode, we're going to discuss the 90-day pause and then shift our discussion to why some think that a recession is now less likely. But before we dive headlong into today's topic, let me introduce my co-host, Tony Shore, whose wit and wisdom, it comes to us without any tariffs, guys.
That's right. That's right, Albert. I'm the same price I've always been. Cheap.
Love it. How you been,
uh,
buddy?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. All kidding aside, I think this is a great topic. And I know that we've gotten good feedback from our listeners and viewers
Mhm.
when we've talked about tariffs in the past. But I've had a couple of great weeks enjoying the nicer weather. So I've been getting out, getting some work done around the house. How about you? What have you
Nice.
been up to?
Same thing. Our weather is, I would say, not as nice as yours, at least the last couple of weeks, but it's warming up. This week's going to be really nice. So I've taken advantage of same thing, yard work, gardening, all that, getting all my chores done. When the
Sure.
weather finally comes nice, I can go out and enjoy it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I'm over here in Minnesota, and usually you guys get the weather we have about 2 days afterwards.
Right.
So,
So keep getting
um
sunshine.
yeah, we had a few days of beautiful, beautiful weather, but now it's cold and rainy, and cloudy, so we'll see.
We don't want to
Hope
hear that. The wind, we want the wind to change directions then on that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this topic, Albert, is a good one. To be honest, I'm kind of surprised at how well the markets have rebounded, considering that we're still in a kind of a period of, even though some deals have been reached, it seems like we're still in a state of flux on what's going to end up happening with the tariffs. It seems like, and that uncertainty has caused market volatility. But now things are looking a little better since they made the deal with China and the UK. So I'm excited for today's show. How do you want to begin?
Well, let's start with an article from the Yahoo Finance called U.S. and China to slash tariffs for 90 days as Trump and Z likely to talk maybe at the end of the week. So it's got some insights that are interesting. For in fact, on May 12th, after 2 intense days of high stake conversations, the U.S. and China, they basically hit the pause button on what's been a pretty brutal trade war, I would say. And we're talking about a 90-day stand down and a serious cut in tariffs on both sides, hopefully, and dropping some duties by more than, let's say, 100 percentage points. Now, that's not just a small tweak. That's actually a full on, like, let's say, reset. Now, President Trump called it a total reset with China and mentioned he was likely to reconnect with President Xi later that week. If that conversation moves forward, it could lay the groundwork for even more progress. Now, here's what it means in plain terms. U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods will fall from a high of 145% down to 30%. And then China will be slashing their retaliatory tariffs from 125% to just 10%. Now, that's a game changer for exporters, importers, and frankly, anyone who buys, builds, or invests. So, this pause isn't just a breather, it's a signal. It tells the market, the business community, and everyday families that progress is possible when cooler heads prevail and strategy does take the wheel.
Well, exactly, and we always want cooler heads to prevail. That's
Right.
good. That's where you come in, right?
Sure.
Um, but the market has reacted favorably to the news that the two presidents, the U.S. and China, have made progress at least.
Yeah, and here's the other piece that has folks in the financial world, I guess, sitting up a little straighter shortly after the announcement because markets love clarity and they really love signs of progress as well. And so in this deal, it provides them with both. And the moment the news hit, U.S. futures actually shot up in pre-market trading because it wasn't just about tariffs; it was about a tone and a real meaningful de-escalation. And here's the best part. This 90-day pause isn't a ticking clock, let's say. It's a path, the article even notes that the pause could be extended as long as both sides keep showing good faith, stay engaged, and obviously have the kind of dialogue that actually moves the needle. Now, the US and China even released a joint statement, which is in itself a rare thing these days, which basically said both sides plan to keep the conversation going, alternating meetings between our two countries during the next several weeks. So that's not just diplomacy. I think that's momentum. And momentum matters because whether you're managing, let's say, a portfolio or building a business or just trying to, make smart money moves in uncertain times, this is the kind of news that reminds us that progress happens, well, when people stay at the table and keep talking.
Yeah. Well, and what does the article say about the chances of the talks between the U.S. and China leading to a more agreeable and lasting deal?
Well, okay. So to answer that, let's zoom in on this weekend's talks actually tackled, because this wasn't just a handshake and let's say a photo op. This was the first round in what's expected to be a long, layered negotiation covering everything from intellectual property to steel, semiconductors, agriculture, and even fentanyl. And here's something that's surprised a lot of folks in a good way. Fentanyl became a central focus of the conversation. And one US official even called it the upside surprise of that weekend. And the Chinese showed up ready to talk, which was pretty neat, and sending a deputy, let's say, minister to engage directly on the issue. Now, that's a signal, and they know it's serious, and they're showing up with substance, not just sound bites. So, with that said, the 20% tariff the US put in place early in the Trump presidency, specifically tied to fentanyl related imports, well, that's still in place. And that's why, even after the recent agreement, US tariffs are dialing back to 30%, while China's fall to 10%. Now, it's also worth noting that some of the tougher sector specific tariffs, like let's say the ones on electric vehicles and steel, well, they're staying put. These were set before the current administration even took office, and they weren't touched in the May 12 announcement. But the takeaway is that this was a solid first step, we'll say real progress, but it's just the beginning of a bigger journey. So remember that. And one that's going to take strategy, stamina, and steady follow through. So let me quickly note that if you have concerns about what tariffs and trade deals could mean for your assets and eventually retirement, please don't hesitate to reach out to your financial services professional to share those concerns and ask those questions. Remember, one of the main drivers behind building a financial strategy, well, is to have it to lean on when the market gets bumpy or, let's say, murky.
Yeah. Well, and it's going to. I mean, we're going to have ups and downs in the
Oh,
markets
yes.
regardless. And sometimes you need um, to be aware of that. I think sometimes it's just going to give us a correction, and sometimes you need those corrections. We had 2 years of very high markets
Yes.
setting record highs, which is great. But
Right.
there are going to be corrections. But if you're worried about that, or you want to get a second opinion on your finances, or you want to make sure that you have a plan in place that can weather the ups and downs of the market, I know you're offering a no charge, no obligation consultation to
Mhm.
talk to people about that. How can our listeners and viewers get a hold of you, Albert, to set that up?
Yeah, listeners, come visit my website, www.kaizenfinancialgroup.com. That's Kaizen, Kaizen, or call my office at 586-752-7008 and discuss how we can answer your questions and address your concerns about, let's say, recessions, your financial strategy, or any other parts of your retirement.
All right. Well, I think that's great, Albert, and we're going to continue this discussion. Recession fears are easing. That's good. But we may still have some rocky roads ahead depending on what happens. You talked about the fact that the U.S. and China have at least had a temporary deal in place, a 90-day deal, which is good. What's next?
All right, well, let's stick back to that Yahoo Finance article titled U.S. and China to slash tariffs for 90 days. Uh, has some more relevant details. That's because, well, let's talk about, well, that the deal that includes pharmaceuticals. All right. And that's because administrations want to bring those businesses and those supply chains back home to the U.S. And honestly, that's a part of a bigger conversation in all of this. In fact, a member of the American delegation shared that they've zeroed in on 5 or 6 key industries where we've got real vulnerabilities, places where we're either too dependent on overseas suppliers or lacking reliable partnerships. So the goal moving forward now is more strategic independence, or let's say trusted sourcing from close allies. Now, none of this happens overnight. This deal came after days of, let's say, calm, calculated de escalation by the US side and weeks of careful diplomatic posturing. But both countries had dialed up tariffs to the point where I think it felt like a full on trade embargo. And make no mistake, each side tried to frame the other, obviously, as the one who needed a deal more. But that's how leverage works in any type of negotiation. And it's not about who yells the loudest. It's about who stays focused on the outcomes. And here's what matters. Both sides came back to the table. Progress was made, and now there's room to keep moving forward. Now, for anyone out there leading a business or running a household, or let's say even building a financial plan, this is your reminder. Strategy is always better than reaction. Stay clear on your priorities, control what you can, and never be afraid to step back, regroup, and come back to the table smarter than you left it.
Yeah. Well, that's great advice right there. And
Mm.
I understand that basically anything can happen, right? And negotiations can be difficult. But I think this has gone a long way in calming the situation. Obviously, the markets have reacted well.
Yeah. You know, here's where things, I guess, should really start to turn or started to turn on this. Up until recently, obviously, President Trump's tone about China had been firm, some might even say unflinching. And as late as May 7th, he told reporters that the U.S. was losing nothing by not trading with Beijing. And when asked if he'd consider lowering the sky high 145% tariff before negotiations began, he gave a classic Trump response: no. But then the tone began to shift. And if you've been in any kind of negotiation, whether business or personal or even political, you know that tone is everything. By May 8th, there was a subtle pivot. The president said that if this weekend's talks went well, tariffs could come down. And then just a day later, on May 9th, he posted that bringing tariffs down to 80%. Well, seems right, is what he said. And that's a meaningful move. Now, that's someone opening the door, not wide open, but unlocked and cracked just enough to say, let's talk. And then came May 10th. After the meeting in Switzerland, where he called it a very good meeting with China, negotiated in a friendly but constructive manner. Now, that's a dramatic shift in posture and a lesson in strategic communication, because sometimes strength isn't about doubling down. It's about knowing when to pivot, when to de escalate, and also when to shift from pressure to progress. Now, that's something you can take into every part of our lives: negotiations with the client, a team, a vendor, or even yourself. Keep your principles, but remember, stay open to progress. That's how deals get made and futures get built.
It is, and I'm glad to see there is some progress being made. But I will admit, Albert, my head is spinning from everything that's going on and trying to keep track of all the tariff talk and the tariff timelines that you're talking about.
Hmm.
Give us a rundown of some of the things that have happened, just to reiterate what's been going on.
All right. Well, let's take a quick walk through what's been, let's say, a dramatic few months on the global stage, and perhaps even a masterclass in negotiation, positioning, and what happens when two economic heavyweights, well, decide to flex. So it all started on February 1st with a warning shot, let's say, and President Trump imposed a 10% tariff on Chinese imports, framing it as a response to the fentanyl crisis. Then it was a bold move meant to send a signal, and not just to China, but to the world. The US was ready to tighten the reins. Then came the follow through in March. Tariffs jumps to 20%. And China, well, they didn't sit still, obviously. They hit back with a 15% tariff on US agricultural exports that targeted key industries and key states. And that's how trade wars work. So every move has a counter. Then on April 2nd, President Trump took it up another notch, calling it Liberation Day. He rolled out a sweeping 34% tariff on Chinese imports, and then tensions were fully escalated. Now, China matched it on and then April 9th and added a few extra restrictions for good measures. Now, at this point, it wasn't just a disagreement, it was actually a full on economic standoff. Things then hit their peak on April 9 when the US raised tariffs to a whopping 145%. China responded with 125% of its own. That wasn't just tough talk, it was the equivalent of slamming the trade doors shut. But then came the latest twist on May 12th, and it's the part we can all learn from. After a day of high level talks in Switzerland, both sides decided to hit pause, a 90-day truce. Tariffs came way down, with U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods dropping from 145% back to 30%, and China dropping theirs from 125% to just 10%. So that's not just de escalation, that's strategy. And that's a return to the table. And whether you're negotiating, let's say, global trade or next quarter's business goal, the lesson is the same: know when to hold firm and then know when to make space for progress.
Yeah, and I think that's huge, isn't it? I mean,
Yes.
it's interesting. It has a lot of people wondering where this is all going to end up, but it is important. It just illustrates the importance of working with somebody like yourself, a trusted financial professional who's going to be able to get a written plan in place. You want that in place so you don't have all your eggs in one basket. Are you overexposed to too much risk? Do you have enough growth?
Mhm.
What's your plan moving forward? Is this going to affect your retirement if you're retiring anytime soon? So, to get that taken care of, to get these questions answered, and get a solid financial plan in place, you need to be working with a trusted fiduciary, a financial professional. How can our listeners get a hold of you if they want to set up that no charge, no obligation consultation?
Yeah, folks, you can visit my website, as mentioned before, www.kaizenfinancialgroup.com. That's Kaizen, Kaizen. Call my office at 586-752-7008. And again, discuss how we can answer your questions, your concerns, whether it's about recessions, your financial plan, your retirement. Remember, it's our goal to help you prepare for retirement so you can own your retirement.
Well, and that's great, and that's what you do. You need to own your retirement. Now, we've been talking about the 90-day tariff pause between the U.S. and China. That's been good news. There's been more tariff talks since then,
Yes.
and it's still kind of a moving piece out there. It's in motion, so it can be hard to track. What's next?
Well, let's keep our focus on, let's say, the tariffs by discussing how the pause between US and China, well, has Wall Street softening its predictions of an impending recession. Another Yahoo article titled The China Tariff Pause has Wall Street scaling back recession cause. We got some good reasoning from this article. So let's talk about the ripple effect of the recent tariff pause and why it has Wall Street rethinking recession fears. So for a while there, if you remember, talk of a late 2025 downturn was picking up steam. Economists were worried that the widespread tariffs out of DC would heat up inflation and cool down growth, which is a dangerous combo. But now with this 90-day pause on most of the tariffs hitting Chinese goods, the mood is starting to shift. Economists are still forecasting a slowdown, but not a stall out. In fact, according to JP Morgan's top US economist, Michael Ferroli, who was the first on Wall Street, by the way, to ring the recession alarm after those big tariffs hikes, recession odds have now dropped for him below 50%. Here's why that matters for you. Tariffs are, well, at their core, a tax. And when you roll them back, it's like giving American consumers a $300 billion tax cut. That's money that was going to disappear into higher prices on everything from electronics to groceries that now stays in your pocket.
Right. And that's, yeah. And, people have been upset about rising prices, inflation, the
Mhm.
cost of goods. And, the tariffs were a really big scare when it comes to that. So we'll see. Right. What's the lesson here, though?
Well, here it is. The big picture moves like trade policies aren't just headlines. And that's what you have to understand. They affect your grocery bills, like you said, your portfolio, your plans. But smart adjustments grounded in strategy can change the whole game. And whether you're, let's say, the president of the United States or the CEO of your own household budget, knowing when to ease off the throttle can be just as powerful as knowing when to hit it. So stay focused, stay fluid, and remember that good news isn't just for Wall Street, it's for everyone who's got a plan and is willing to stick to it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what you need to do. And it's also good news that warrants a check-in with your financial services professional to make
Mhm.
certain that that financial strategy matches current events and what's going on, correct?
Yes, definitely. And remember, it's not just, let's say, JP Morgan hitting the brakes on recession talk. Other major players are shifting their outlooks too. Yardini Research, Goldman Sachs, even Barclays are all dialing back that doom and gloom and seeing signs of resilience. Now, Goldman's economic team just lowered their odds of recession in the next year from 45% down to 35% and even bumped up their growth forecast. So now they're calling for a 1% GDP growth in 2025. That's up from only a 0.5% that they were predicting earlier. And that may not sound like fireworks, but gosh, in a year like this and what we've already gone through, I think that's a meaningful pivot. And you have to remember, Yardini sees even more upside. They've raised their growth expectations actually to between 1.5% and 2.5%. And Barclays, well, they weren't even they went further, I say, completely removing the recession call after watching how the US backed off the tariff throttle. So the reason for the shift comes down to, well, let's just say momentum and pressure relief. Barclays chief US economist Giannoni put it plainly. With tariffs scaling back, there's a lot less friction in the system. That means less disruption to business, fewer shocks to the labor market, and less inflation for consumers to battle. This is the kind of environment where confidence can build again, where if you do the right moves, not just at the policy level, but even in your own financial plan, can start paying off. And it's proof that markets respond to, well, smart, intentional de-escalation the same way your clients do. So with relief, optimism, and a willingness to re-engage. So keep watching, keep working, and stay ready to work with your financial services professional to act when the opportunity shows up because it may already be knocking on the door.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I think this is where we can wrap up today's show, Albert. But
Mhm.
it's been a great conversation. Before we go, once again, let our listeners know you're offering a no charge, no obligation consultation. They can ask you questions. I know you love to hear from our listeners and viewers and talk to them about these things. How can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, folks, give my office a call, 586-752-7008, or go to my website at www.kaizenfinancialgroup.com. That's Kaizen. And we can discuss all your questions and concerns addressing recessions, your, again, financial plan, your retirement target, all of that. Okay. Because remember, it's our goal to help you prepare for the retirement that you've worked so hard for so you can own your retirement.
All right. And great show today, Albert. Listeners, thanks for tuning in. That does it for today's episode of Own Your Retirement with our host, Albert Lalonde.
Take care, everyone.